This 4-year-old orphan boy screamed inside the house all day, but no one did anything. One day, a millionaire kicks down the door and discovers something shocking. Comment and give my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The piercing scream echoed through the peeling walls of the small house in the suburbs of Chicago. A desperate sound that sliced through the morning air like a blade. The 4-year-old orphan boy was alone once again, his voice hoarse from crying for help that never came. His small, trembling hands gripped the rusty bars of the window, watching the empty street through the cracked glass that distorted his view of the outside world. The dilapidated house around him told a story of neglect that stretched back for months. Yellowed wallpaper hung from the damp walls. Dust-covered furniture piled up in dark corners, and the smell of mold permeated every room. The boy had learned to survive in that maze of negligence, developing instincts that no child should possess. His desperate cries became part of the morning routine of the working-class neighborhood. Hurried neighbors walked along the uneven sidewalk, averting their eyes from the residents that exuded sadness. Mothers taking their children to school quickened their pace when they passed the rusty gate, whispering to each other about that strange situation that everyone preferred to ignore. Across the street, televisions were turned on at maximum volume in the early morning hours. The artificial noise muffled the cries for help coming from the small building abandoned by time. It was easier to pretend they didn't hear, that this responsibility belonged to someone else, to anyone other than themselves. The boy was extremely thin, his fragile appearance contrasting starkly with his real age. His torn clothes hung loosely on his small body, and his large eyes expressed a deep sadness that seemed too old for his child's face. At night, he talked to himself, creating different voices to accompany his devastating loneliness. In the abandoned kitchen, dirty dishes had piled up for weeks. The boy had learned to look for scraps of food in the neighbors' garbage bags, developing a quiet courage that kept him alive. His small nightly excursions to the trash became survival rituals, executed with the precision of someone who knew his life depended on those furtive moments. The 30-year-old millionaire first passed by that street during a March morning, driving her luxury car on the way to an important meeting about the expansion of her restaurant chain. Her impeccable movie star appearance contrasted with the visible poverty of the neighborhood, but something in those distant screams made her slow down unconsciously. For weeks, she returned by the same street, always at the same time, always hearing those disturbing sounds that seemed to come from another world. Initially, she classified it as common childish tantrums, but there was a desperate quality in those vocalizations that began to bother her subconscious in an inexplicable way. Her business was thriving, while that strange situation occupied ever larger spaces in her thoughts. During executive meetings at her elegant restaurants, her mind wandered to that small, anguished voice that echoed every morning. The contrast between her life of luxury and abundance and that misery she witnessed daily began to create cracks in her tranquil conscience. The boy, in turn, had begun to recognize the distinctive sound of her car engine. In the moments when she passed by the street, he positioned himself at the broken window, observing through the crack the metallic gleam that represented a world completely different from his own. Something in that regular sight awakened in him a fragile hope that he could not fully understand. The weeks turned into a month, and the screams continued to echo through the indifferent neighborhood. The neighborhood watch captain, a greedy 60-year-old man with a grey mustache and prominent belly, began to circulate among the houses with a peculiar proposal. He offered a solution to the noise problem upon payment of a monthly peacekeeping fee in the neighborhood. Working families, exhausted by the daily routine and bothered by the constant screams, began to pay the requested amount without questioning much the method that would be used. The watch captain assured them that appropriate measures would be taken, that the competent authorities were already aware of the situation, and that soon the problem would be resolved definitively. Meanwhile, the millionaire began to subtly alter her morning route, passing more slowly through the problematic street. Her growing curiosity mingled with a concern that she could not rationally explain. During lunches in her sophisticated restaurants, she served satisfied customers while her mind remained trapped in those desperate sounds that seemed to haunt her, even in the most elegant environments. The boy developed the ability to perfectly imitate different voices and sounds he heard in the street. During his long hours of solitude, he created elaborate conversations with himself, playing different characters that filled the emotional void of his existence. One voice represented his deceased mother, another imitated his father, and a third belonged to an imaginary friend who would never abandon him. On a rainy April afternoon, the millionaire made a decision that would change the course of events. Instead of just passing by the street, she parked her car at a safe distance and observed the dilapidated house for several minutes. The screams had stopped temporarily, replaced by an even more disturbing silence that made her heart race for no apparent reason. In that moment of silent observation, she noticed subtle movements behind the broken window. A small shadow moved inside the house, confirming her suspicions that there really was a child living alone in those deplorable conditions. The shocking discovery came 3 days after that rainy afternoon. The millionaire had returned to the location with growing determination, determined to understand exactly what was happening in that abandoned residence. When the screams started again during lunchtime, she realized that they were not childish tantrums, but desperate cries for help from a child who was clearly in real danger. The sound echoed differently in the midday light. There was a desperate urgency, an almost animalistic quality of survival that made her stomach churn. The elegant woman, accustomed to the controlled environments of her luxurious restaurants, felt a wave of nausea as she recognized the pure despair in those children's vocalizations. Hidden behind a tree on the opposite sidewalk, she watched for over an hour. That was when she witnessed something that would completely change her perspective on the situation. The boy emerged furtively from the back of the house, his movements calculated and silent, like those of a small wild animal. He went directly to the neighbor's garbage bags, rummaging with a skill that revealed months of practice. His small, thin hands separated scraps of spoiled food with meticulous care, keeping pieces that still looked edible in a torn plastic bag. The scene was devastating. A 4-year-old child had become an expert in urban survival, developing skills that adults in extreme situations would take weeks to learn. The millionaire felt warm tears run down her perfectly made-up cheeks. At that moment, she understood that she was not facing a situation of temporary neglect, but of total and systematic abandonment. That child was literally fighting for his life every day, without any responsible adult knowing or caring about his existence. During the following week, she completely altered her routine to observe the boy's patterns of behavior. She discovered that he possessed an extraordinary ability that left her simultaneously impressed and deeply saddened. The boy could imitate with absolute perfection any voice or sound he heard, using this ability to create elaborate imaginary companions. Sitting in her car with the windows ajar, she listened to entire conversations he had with himself. A sweet voice imitated his mother, asking about his day and offering words of affection. Another, deeper voice represented his father, telling invented stories and promising that he would soon return to pick him up. A third voice, clearly created by his imagination, belonged to a faithful friend who would never abandon him. The emotional complexity of those solitary conversations revealed a surprising intelligence hidden under the desperate circumstances. The boy not only imitated voices but created coherent and emotionally rich dialogues that filled the devastating void of his abandoned existence. It was during this period of intense observation that the millionaire made a disturbing discovery about the neighborhood watch captain. During a casual conversation in a nearby coffee shop, she overheard two neighbors commenting on the fees they were paying to solve the problem of the screams. One of them mentioned that the man had guaranteed that the child was dangerous and that specialized authorities were already dealing with the case. The information infuriated her. While that child languished in subhuman conditions, an unscrupulous man profited from the suffering of others, feeding lies that kept the neighborhood passive in the face of a situation that called for immediate intervention. The injustice of the situation awakened in her an outrage that she had not felt for years. That night, in her silent mansion, the millionaire made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She prepared a careful package with nutritious food, clean water, and some basic hygiene items. Her intention was to leave it discreetly at the door of the dilapidated house during the early hours of the morning, when the streets were deserted. The operation was executed with military precision. At 3 in the morning, she parked far from the house and walked silently through the shadows to the main door. The package was positioned strategically, protected from the rain and easily visible to anyone leaving the residence. She returned to the car with her heart racing, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. The next morning, she returned earlier than usual, anxious to find out if her anonymous help had been found. The package had disappeared, replaced by something that made her stop the car immediately. On the door, carefully positioned where the package had been, there was a small drawing made with almost worn crayons. The image showed two figures, a small child smiling and an elegant woman next to a car. The colors were vibrant despite the precarious material, and the details revealed an attentive observation that surprised her completely. The boy not only knew of her constant presence, but had created an artistic representation of gratitude that touched her heart in an indescribable way. During the following days, a silent routine was established between them. She left packages of food and basic supplies during the early hours of the morning, and he reciprocated with increasingly elaborate drawings. The images told wordless stories about his daily life, his dreams and fears, creating a visual communication that transcended the need for spoken words. One of the drawings showed the interior of the house as seen through the child's eyes. Improvised furniture made of cardboard boxes, an ingenious system for collecting rainwater using buckets and plastic bottles, and organized corners where he kept his few precious belongings. The adaptability revealed in those details was simultaneously impressive and devastating. Another drawing revealed a discovery that made her cry uncontrollably. The boy had created a special space in the house where he kept small, shiny objects found on the street. Bottle caps, pieces of aluminum foil, rusty coins, and fragments of colored glass. He organized them carefully as if they were precious treasures, believing that they were magical gifts that his parents sent him from heaven. The desperate ingenuity of that collection of treasures revealed the depth of emotional abandonment that the child faced. He had created a personal mythology to give meaning to the discarded objects he found, transforming garbage into symbols of love and connection with his deceased parents. It was during this phase of silent communication that the millionaire began to investigate more deeply the boy's legal situation. Her research revealed a network of bureaucratic negligence that had allowed a child to completely disappear from official records. No government institution had information about his existence or current location. The discovery left her simultaneously furious and determined. That child had been forgotten by all the systems that should protect him, abandoned in a legal limbo that allowed his complete social invisibility. The systematic injustice of the situation awakened in her a maternal fury that she did not know she possessed, fueling a growing determination to completely change that devastating reality. On the last night of that transformative month, she found under the door a drawing that made her make the most important decision of her adult life. The image showed the same elegant woman, but this time she was holding the child's hand, both smiling under a golden sun that shone brightly above their joined heads. The decision to enter the house came with a courage that the millionaire did not know she possessed. For 3 consecutive nights, she stayed awake planning every detail of the operation that would change their lives forever. Communication through drawings had created a deep emotional connection, but she understood that direct words and actions were necessary to definitively resolve that devastating situation. On Friday morning, she arrived at the street earlier than usual, carrying a small bag with basic tools and emergency supplies. Her heart beat rapidly as she watched the silent house, mentally preparing herself for what she might find on the other side of that door that for months had protected terrible secrets of abandonment and neglect. The first obstacle was the rusty lock that resisted her attempts to break it open for several minutes. Her perfectly manicured hands became soiled with rust and dust as she manipulated the tools with a determination that surprised even herself. When the door finally gave way with a prolonged creak, a smell of mold and abandonment invaded her nostrils, causing her to recoil momentarily. What she discovered inside the residence exceeded her worst expectations and, at the same time, revealed a capacity for survival that left her speechless. The boy had transformed that dilapidated space into a complex and functional world, creating ingenious solutions to problems that experienced adults would take days to solve properly. In the main room, improvised furniture made of cardboard boxes and discarded materials formed an environment organized with military precision. A low table built with boards balanced on bricks served as the center of activities, surrounded by cushioned seats made of rags and old newspapers carefully folded. The walls were decorated with his drawings, creating an art gallery that told the visual story of his solitary existence. The rainwater collection system was particularly impressive. Buckets strategically positioned under leaks in the ceiling connected through improvised hoses to plastic bottles that stored the precious liquid. A rudimentary filter made with layers of fabric, sand, and charcoal demonstrated knowledge of purification that he had developed instinctively or learned by observing adults in similar situations. In the abandoned kitchen, he had created a functional space using only resources found in the trash. Clean dishes were stacked carefully next to basic utensils that he kept in surprisingly hygienic conditions. A small stove improvised with cans and fuel found on the street allowed him to heat food when he managed to get suitable ingredients. The bedroom revealed even more touching aspects of his adaptive capacity. A bed made of newspaper mattresses and torn blankets occupied a protected corner, surrounded by his treasures, organized in small containers labeled with drawings. Each shiny object possessed a specific story in his personal mythology. The golden bottle cap represented a crown sent by his father. The piece of blue glass was a fragment of the sky that his mother had saved especially for him. But the most impressive discovery was hidden in an improvised closet. Stacks of old magazines found in the trash had been organized by categories, and on the margins of many pages, words were circled and copied into a homemade notebook made of loose sheets tied with string. The boy had learned to read on his own, developing a self-taught study method that revealed an exceptional intelligence hidden under desperate circumstances. The notebook contained entire pages of vocabulary carefully copied, simple sentences constructed with words he mastered, and detailed drawings that illustrated more complex concepts. A specific section was dedicated to memories of his parents, reproduced with impressive details that demonstrated an extraordinary visual retention capacity for such a young child. It was at this moment of admiring discovery that she heard silent footsteps behind her. The boy had returned from one of his expeditions to the trash and was watching her from the entrance to the room. his large eyes expressing a mixture of curiosity and caution that broke her heart. He showed no fear, only a keen attention that revealed months of hypervigilance necessary for his survival. For several minutes, they observed each other in silence. The millionaire, kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of his daily struggle for life, and the boy, motionless at the door, assessing whether that presence represented help or threat. The tension in the air was palpable, loaded with possibilities that could determine the future of both. Slowly, he approached and extended a folded sheet of paper. It was another drawing, but this one possessed a different quality from the previous ones. The image showed the very scene they were living, the elegant woman discovering his secret world, but instead of expressing invasion or violation, the drawing conveyed gratitude and hope. He had anticipated that moment and planned it as a carefully orchestrated revelation. The first words he spoke were not complaints or expressions of fear, but a whispered "thank you" in a voice hoarse from disuse. He thanked her for hearing his screams when no one else did, revealing a devastating emotional maturity for a child who should only be concerned with innocent games and discoveries. The conversation that followed revealed details about the abandonment that left her furious with humanity in general. Distant relatives had promised to return in a few days after receiving a small inheritance from his deceased parents, but disappeared completely as soon as the money was transferred. They had left false documents suggesting that neighbors would take care of the child, creating a diluted responsibility that allowed everyone to ignore the situation. But the most shocking revelation came when she discovered documents hidden in a secret drawer that the boy had found weeks before. Papers signed by the relatives showed that they had illegally sold the property to an unknown buyer, pocketing the money and disappearing without a trace. The boy was officially homeless and without legal family, existing in a bureaucratic limbo that facilitated his social invisibility. The following discovery was even more disturbing. Among the documents, she found correspondence between the fugitive relatives and the corrupt neighborhood watch captain. The letters revealed that he was a distant cousin of the deceased parents and knew of the boy's existence all along. More than that, he had consciously orchestrated the situation so that he could appropriate the small inheritance left by the parents. The scheme was elaborate and cruel. The watch captain kept the boy in a situation of abandonment while charging neighbors fees to solve the problem, creating a profit cycle based on the suffering of a helpless child. He spread lies about the dangerousness of the situation to keep the community passive, while benefiting financially from both the stolen inheritance and the unduly charged fees. The fury that took over the millionaire at that moment was different from any emotion she had experienced in her adult life. It was not just outrage at the injustice, but a primal, maternal anger that awakened protective instincts she did not know she possessed. The systematic betrayal of that child by all the adults who should protect her represented a moral failure that she was determined to correct. During the following hours, she began to organize a legal strategy to completely dismantle the network of corruption and negligence that had allowed that situation. Her considerable financial resources would be mobilized not only to save the boy, but to ensure that those responsible faced appropriate legal consequences for their crimes against a helpless child. While planning the next steps, she watched the boy carefully organizing his belongings, instinctively preparing for another change in his life, already marked by successive abandonments. The fragile trust he placed in her was simultaneously touching and terrifying, representing a responsibility that would completely change the course of her privileged but emotionally empty existence. The transformation began the following Monday, when the millionaire mobilized all her influence and financial resources to correct years of injustice in a matter of weeks. Her lawyers worked tirelessly to dismantle the network of corruption that had allowed the boy's systematic abandonment, while she personally dedicated herself to rebuilding the life of that extraordinary child who had touched her heart in an irreversible way. The first step was to publicly expose the crimes of the corrupt watch captain. The documentary evidence found in the dilapidated house was presented to the competent authorities, revealing not only the theft of the inheritance and the illegal collection of fees from the neighbors, but also a broader network of institutional negligence that had allowed a child to completely disappear from official records. The most impactful discovery came when investigators tracked the fate of the fugitive relatives. They had used the stolen money to open a small business in another city, living comfortably while believing that their responsibility had been conveniently transferred to others. The calculated coldness of their actions revealed a cruelty that shocked even the experienced professionals involved in the case. During this period of legal battles, the millionaire faced her greatest personal challenge, gaining the genuine trust of a child who had learned to survive alone. The boy, despite demonstrating gratitude for the help received, maintained an instinctive caution that revealed deep emotional scars left by successive abandonments. The first weeks of coexistence were marked by small moments of progress, interspersed with devastating emotional setbacks. The boy constantly tested the limits of her patience, unconsciously preparing for another inevitable abandonment. His reactions to simple gestures of affection revealed a child who had learned to protect his heart from expectations that could be brutally shattered. She discovered that he possessed deeply rooted survival rituals that could not be simply eliminated by changes in external circumstances. He continued to keep food hidden in corners of the new house, obsessively checked the doors to ensure escape routes, and kept his shiny treasures always within reach as talismans against future losses. The most touching revelation came when she discovered that the boy possessed a star-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder, identical to the one her own deceased son had had. The coincidence did not represent family connection, but she interpreted that sign as a message from fate, a second chance to exercise the maternal love that had been brutally interrupted years before. During a particularly difficult night, when nightmares about abandonment made the boy wake up screaming, she understood that her own healing journey was intrinsically connected to his. Both had lost fundamental pieces of their identities. He, a protected and loved childhood; she, the opportunity to be a mother, and together they could rebuild what seemed lost forever. The legal process revealed additional details about the extent of the corruption that had allowed that tragedy. The neighborhood watch captain had not only stolen the inheritance and charged illegal fees, but had also falsified official documents to hide the child's existence from social protection systems. His criminal operation had been facilitated by corrupt officials who purposefully ignored obvious signs of neglect. The neighborhood community, initially resistant to accepting its own passive complicity, gradually began to understand how they had been manipulated. Neighbors who paid the illegal fees discovered that their good intentions had been exploited by a man who profited from the suffering of others. The revelation created a wave of outrage that resulted in significant changes in the local community organization. While justice ran its course, the millionaire faced her own internal demons related to the loss of her son. The growing love she felt for the orphan boy awakened painful memories that she had suppressed for years, forcing her to confront traumas that had shaped her distant and exclusively business-focused personality. The first time the boy spontaneously called her Mom was during a seemingly trivial moment. She was preparing his favorite snack in the kitchen when he appeared silently and whispered the word with a naturalness that made her cry uncontrollably. In that instant, both understood that they had found what they were looking for without knowing it, a true family born of mutual choice and unconditional love. The following months were dedicated to the careful rebuilding of trust and the creation of new family traditions. She discovered that the boy possessed exceptional artistic talents that extended beyond the initial drawings. His capacity for detailed observation and precise visual reproduction suggested potential for development in creative areas that could flourish with proper education and stimulation. School represented another significant challenge. The boy, accustomed to self-directed learning, initially resisted the formal structure of traditional education. His above-average intelligence created complex situations with teachers unprepared to deal with a child who had developed his own methods of understanding and expressing knowledge. Gradually, adaptations were made to accommodate his special needs. Personalized educational programs allowed him to explore his unique interests while developing social skills that had been neglected during his years of isolation. Integration with other children was particularly challenging, requiring patience and carefully planned strategies. The official adoption process proved more complex than initially anticipated. The boy's unique legal situation, officially non-existent in government records, created bureaucratic obstacles that tested her persistence. Specialized lawyers worked for months to establish his legal identity and create appropriate documentation that allowed the formalization of the adoption. During this period of legal uncertainty, she faced her greatest fears about the possibility of losing again someone she loved. The relentless bureaucracy and lengthy procedures awakened deep anxieties related to control and family security. Her nights became long vigils, concerned with procedural details that could determine the future of both. The final twist came from an unexpected source, the boy himself, demonstrating an emotional maturity that surprised all the professionals involved, wrote a letter to the judges responsible for the case. His simple but deeply touching words described not only his desire to have a real family, but also his understanding of the genuine love he had found in that extraordinary woman. On the day of the official adoption approval, 6 months after that first morning when she decided to investigate the desperate cries, they were both in court surrounded by lawyers, social workers, and staff who had worked tirelessly to correct years of institutional neglect. The solemn moment of signing the final documents marked not only the legal creation of a new family, but the completion of a journey of mutual healing that had transformed 2 lives, devastated by loss, into a solid and loving family unit. When they left the courthouse on that sunny afternoon, she held firmly the small hand that had learned to trust adult love again. He carried a new birth certificate where he was officially listed as her son, but more importantly, both carried hearts that had rediscovered the ability to love and be loved unconditionally. The house they bought together became a sanctuary where painful memories of the past coexisted peacefully with bright hopes for the future. The shiny treasures he had collected during his months of abandonment were carefully preserved in a special display case, not as reminders of suffering, but as symbols of his extraordinary ability to find beauty and hope even in the most desperate circumstances. Years later, when he had become a talented young artist whose works explored themes of resilience and transformation, they frequently revisited that street where it all began. The dilapidated house had been demolished and replaced by a small community park, but both knew that that place would always represent the moment when 2 lost souls met and discovered that life's greatest treasures are found when we are willing to hear the silent cries of those who desperately need to be seen and loved. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.